Hi, I'm Daniel, the co-founder and CEO of Edexia. And in this video, I'm going to go through a quick onboarding tutorial to help you get set up on the platform. One thing to note though, before we begin, is that throughout this whole term, we'll be constantly improving the platform. Week after week, we'll be releasing new features and improving old ones to improve the platform to have a greater positive impact in your day-to-day. And throughout this process, we'd love to support you however we can. I would also love to hear any ideas that you can think of on how we can improve the platform. And so throughout your process, if you ever get lost or remotely confused, or you get the red bar of death down the bottom corner saying there was an error, or things are just taking too long, we'd love to help. And you can just come down to this bottom left-hand corner here and press this question mark. There you'll be presented with three options. If you want just some quick help or advice with a particular error or particular issue, or you just want to raise a quick idea, you can press the chat with us and send us a quick message. Or if you want to dedicate a one-on-one support call, we'd love for you to book it just with this link here. And finally, if you have any ideas, we'd love to discuss them. We're here to provide as much support and would love to discuss as much as possible because ultimately we're here to serve you and everyone else in the education system. And so if you even get lost along this onboarding process, please just come down to this button down below and would love to help. And if you prefer to do this onboarding one-on-one on a Zoom call, just book a call with us now. But with that out of the way, we can dive into the platform. So here, when you log into Edexia, you'll be greeted with a class dashboard. Because inside of Edexia, we built a lightweight LMS system. We'll be looking to integrate into your school's LMS as we progress, hopefully looking at it over the term and potentially implementing it in early term 2 or even earlier, depending on the school's eagerness and readiness. But for now, you can use Edexia effectively as a lightweight LMS, where once you sign up, you can think about what classes you want to experiment with on Edexia, and then you can create those classes using this button in the top right. You can then just fill in the details of that class, such as the year level and the subject. Here you can just type in the subject, or if you want, you can scroll through the endless list, but usually I prefer to search it myself. You can then give that class a quick name. All of this is largely supplementary and is largely just for organization, and so don't worry too much if the exact subject isn't there, but if you'd like us to add it, like I said, just send a quick message in the chat. Then once you're done, you can just press submit. You'll then be taken to the dashboard for this class. And here there are three core tabs in this dashboard. Firstly, you have your assessments, and this is where you'll get a list of all the assessments you've created in Edexia for this class. In the middle, you'll see an analytics tab, which will be coming quite soon, and if you'd love to contribute to the ideas and the analytics that we'll be developing, once again, we'd love to hear from you. Just click that button in the bottom left. And then this third tab is where you can add your students. Because like I said, while Edexia is outside of the LMS, if you would like, and if your school is comfortable with it, you can use Edexia effectively as a lightweight LMS for very simple formative tasks that wouldn't have otherwise been inside of the LMS. Obviously, we don't want you uploading your summative assessment here rather than your learning management system, but if you have a formative quiz that wouldn't be there anyway, some classes and some schools are comfortable with you using this to streamline your process with Edexia. Where here, you can just generate a link for students to join your class or a QR code. And then if you send this link or display this QR code, then students can follow that and join their class. And then they can sign into Edexia with their school accounts and see their classes and the assessments that have been published by their teachers to actually submit responses on their side. If you choose not to do that, however, you can still use the teacher submission portal, which I'll show you now. Because the key thing you'll do on Edexia is create assessment. So let's go through that workflow now. All you have to do is click this button at the top right saying New Assessment. You'll then be greeted with three options. The first is to create this assessment with AI, and this is the workflow that we would largely recommend to get the most instant value from the platform. The second is if you have a pre-existing assessment that you would like to upload and test on Edexia. This can be something that you're currently administering to your students, or maybe you just want to play around with some past summative responses. And then the third option is to reuse an assessment that either you have created or someone else on the platform within your organization has created for you to experiment with as well. For now, I'll start with going with the Create with AI option to show you how you can use that workflow. So let's say you're a Year 12 chemistry teacher and you want to create a quick quiz. You'll just come here, press Create with AI, and then give a very simple prompt to Edexia on what kind of quiz you're looking for. So maybe you want to assess their understanding of chemical equilibrium with a quick 5-question quiz that has medium difficulty. One thing you'll be noticing is that this form is going to be substantially improved, and this AI assessment creation will be a lot better, where you'll be able to select from syllabus standards, and you'll see just a lot better of a form here. But for now, you can just fill in the basic sort of guidance of what kind of quiz you're looking for, how many questions, and what difficulty, and then press Next. Edexia will then generate the questions, and you can also give this assessment a name. And then for each question, it'll generate a corresponding rubric item. And so you can see here, you can click the View Rubric, and there's 2 types of rubrics. For most of the science and math questions, it'll propose a checklist-based rubric where it's saying +1 mark for A, +1 mark for B, and you can then go through and delete and add or edit particular rubric items, and then save and close. You can also regenerate the rubric down below, where maybe you have a specific table-based rubric you would like to use. You can also upload that rubric here, or create a new rubric with AI, or reuse a previous rubric you've already trained. Next week, you'll also be able to edit these questions a lot better. Right now, you can't edit the questions, so I'd largely recommend generating maybe 7 or so, or 10 questions, and then choosing your favorite 5 and so on. But next week, you'll see quite a substantial improvement to this task creation workflow, especially when it comes to rubric creation as well. If you had instead chosen the upload assessment option back at the creation form here, you would then be prompted to upload the task. I'd recommend uploading the task document with the associated marking rubric. So I'll go here and I'll upload a QCAA like task sheet where the QCAA rubric is attached at the very bottom. When you upload that, the AI will first just analyze the document to make sure it includes a task sheet. And then you can click Next, and it'll once again try and unpack the documents and generate the initial task. So first, it's actually just going to summarize the full task sheet. Obviously, usually the full task sheets are quite long, so it's just going to give a very small summary. And then you can click View Rubric, and it'll see the full unpacked rubric. This is where you'll see the first sort of nuance that when it's unpacking, say, a QCAA rubric, it's actually going to unpack it on the descriptors, and then the marks here are going to be the mark ranges. And then it's going to use best fit, where based on the mark range of each descriptor, it'll give the overarching mark. So it's effectively doing what a teacher would do, where it's highlighting the descriptors and then converting that to a mark, just because ultimately that's what the teacher is deciding. If there's any issues here, once again, you can delete and add criteria and edit, but usually the unpacking should be correct. And if it's ever wrong, I would recommend reaching out to us and we can fix it for you. So you can then save that. In the case where you forgot to actually upload the correct rubric, you could actually upload that rubric here. Maybe you just uploaded the task sheet before. And once again, you can create the rubric with AI or reuse a previous one if you've already uploaded this and trained this rubric in the past. You can then click Next, and this is where you can choose the submission type. So like I said, there's 2 options here, the student submission or the teacher submission, where if you select student submission, that's where the students will be able to log into Edexia, see this assessment published, and then actually create a submission on their devices. Where here you'll just put in the due date and also when this should be released on the student side of Edexia. If you click teacher submission, that's when you'll have to upload the responses yourself. And here you'll notice the due date is optional, and then you can just go onto your device and drag them all in. So you would end up, say, bulk downloading them from the LMS and then uploading them here and pressing submit. However, very soon you'll just see the option to publish to your LMS. So once it's integrated into the LMS, you can go into Edexia, create an assessment, and then publish it to the LMS for it to have submissions, or you could even initiate that creation inside the LMS itself. So after you've submitted, you'll then be taken to the submission dashboard, where here, if you chose teacher submission, you'll see all the files that you have submitted here. You can also add some additional ones at the top right here. Whereas if it was student submission, you'll see the students starting to submit the assessment and those who have actually completed it. Then when you want to review these submissions, you can then just click this View Submission button. So first, I'll actually show you the full example of a summative QCAA research investigation in the Year 12 chemistry space. So here you see the full multimodal student report. And then in the rubric tab up here, this is where Edexia will start to try and unpack its initial understanding of the rubric. But before I go through the more complex summative case, the more bread and butter case that we would more recommend starting to use Edexia with is in the formative sort of quiz setting, where once you've, say, uploaded the student's response or they've submitted, you'll then be able to see each of the questions alongside their corresponding mark here, where you'll go through and actually look at each of the rubric items that were in that given checklist and analyze them for the given student response. If you then disagree with one of the judgments, you can also untick it here and it'll change the mark. And very soon it'll be highlighting the script itself as to how it's making the judgment in the checklist basis. And then you can skim through all of the questions for the response. And then once you're happy with the overarching step, you can then click approve, and then you can mark the next assessment and keep on going through until you are finished reviewing all the samples. And at that point, you can then either publish the grades if it was student submission, or download the grades if it was teacher submission for you to then go and provide back to the original students. However, when it comes to the table-based rubric, like we saw in this sort of chemistry research investigation, it's a little bit more complicated. Like I said here, this is the base table where it's got the QAA criterion, and it's actually broken them down into the descriptors. It's then going to unpack that. So if you toggle on this unpacking, you can see it trying to effectively understand this rubric, where it's going to go through and define its interpretation of what these rubric items actually mean. So here it'll look at the task and the rubric uploaded, and next week you'll be able to upload additional documents on top of that. And then it'll try and understand, what does it mean to, say, have an informed application versus an adequate application. And below it'll be defining that. So it's saying, oh, an informed application is when it demonstrates accurate chemical understanding, whereas an adequate is when it shows correct chemical understanding and so on, and rudimentary is an unclear and inaccurate. And so it's going to go through and effectively articulate its understanding of how to mark this. Where at the top, it's also going to have some general guidance on how to mark, where it's sort of noting down where it should look. So saying, oh, this is likely sort of in this area, and also how to determine the overarching mark for this criteria based on how they perform with these individual characteristics. And so this is effectively Edexia's brain. This is how it learns, this is how it unpacks its sort of understanding of the rubric for you to physically see. And then when you click Mark Assessment in the top right, Edexia will then begin marking. Right now, it will take some time to actually go through and mark because it's doing a lot of reasoning in the back end. And so in the interim, I'll recommend reviewing the assignment yourself and determining the mark that you think would be appropriate. If it's a past sample, you can just reflect on why you gave each of the given marks so that when you can see Edexia's marks, you can compare its reasoning to yours. Then once Edexia has finished marking, it'll go through and actually make a judgment for each of those criteria items. And so what it's done here is it's looked at all of the factors in the rubric and actually made an overarching decision as to what mark it thinks is most appropriate. Underneath it, it's justified its decision, hyperlinking some of the key points it used to actually decide on those factors. Please note, though, that these highlights aren't fully representative of its reasoning, and these will be improved as we go, but just to give you a rough idea as to some of the areas it's looking, and then it's also summarized its overarching justification in word form alongside the feedback to the student. On the left, you can see all of the sort of comments and its major overarching thought process that it's followed to make this given judgment. Alongside this, Edexia will also go through and select some of these annotations for the student to receive. And so it's gone through and actually brought out some of these annotations in the student script to this left-hand side, and these are the ones which will be sent through and downloaded to the student. You can also add to this list by actually going to any of these annotations here and clicking the Add to Student View, or you can delete some from the student view by clicking the Delete button here. And then if you want to actually see what the student sees, you can click this hat button here. And so what you'll notice is it's effectively filtering down what's in the teacher view. In the teacher view, you see Edexia's full thought process, and you see the mark, the justification, and the feedback. Whereas when you filter down to the student view, you just see the selected comments that you have actually passed through to the student, alongside just the feedback as well. This is one other area we will be fortifying next week, where we're giving you a little bit more granular control over this process and enable you to also filter out the marks here. Right now, you can filter out the marks when you download the student responses. You can toggle off the marks, but we'll be moving that here next week. You also notice that these sort of toggle unpacking things up here as well, because you can unpack each of the given rubric responses, and at the very end, it'll also give the overall mark for this student response. But really the key step when it comes to a complex table-like rubric is calibrating Edexia to make the same judgments that you think are appropriate. Where if you're reading through this assessment yourself and you disagree, or maybe you've previously marked this assessment and disagree with Edexia's judgment, then you can correct how it's thinking. Where here you can actually say, oh no, I don't think the research question is a 5 to 6. I think it's a 3 to 4. Or in other words, you're moving the highlight of that descriptor down one bar. And so you can press this down button here and then say why. And you can just talk to Edexia exactly as you would talk to a teacher. And so I'll make up an example here. So in this case, the student has used this term green synthesis, which is too vague to get full marks. They would need to have more clearly defined what kind of green synthesis method they were using to get full marks. And so please watch out for vague terminology. Edexia will then transcribe what I've just said there, and then you can send it through. If you've given a vague correction, it will actually ask you follow-up questions to clarify, to make sure it understands the change, so it can actually act on it. Based on that moderation, it'll then do two key things. Firstly, it'll update the justification of feedback for this specific student here on the right-hand side. But more significantly, is it'll go back to the underlying rubric and try and refine its understanding of this criteria. And so after the loading bar on the bottom right has disappeared, if you actually go to the rubric page, you'll see its proposed changes to its underlying understanding. Where it's saying here now in the effective and efficient, they need to make sure that they have very specifically defined terms, whereas down here, if they use any vague or undefined terms, it then calls them to be marked down. And so it's trying to analyze that underlying pattern that you've identified to actually mark down that specific student work. And then when that learning up here in the top right is set to manual, you can then confirm or deny these changes, where you then have to manually say, no, actually that's wrong, or yes, that is correct, for it to then be implemented. Whereas in this phase, this won't actually be implemented for the next student assessment. But as soon as you accept it, then the next student assessment will use this updated rubric. And if you set this learning to automatic, then it'll do it automatically, and you won't have to accept or deny any of Edexia's changes. It'll implement them straight away for you. And so then you can continue to go through and correct its judgments when it's misaligned with your own, and then that'll refine its underlying understanding. And then once you're confident with this student script, you can then say approve. Once everything is correct, you can go approve, and then it'll take you to the next one, and then you can mark and repeat. So you mark, you moderate, it then corrects the rubric. If you want to manually review it, you can, otherwise set it to auto learn, and then you approve the assessment once everything is done, and then you mark the next one, and you rinse and repeat. And then Edexia is iteratively learning these trends as to how it thinks it should mark, and then it's trying to align its understanding with your own. And then if you ever notice that it's learning too slowly, or you keep on saying the same moderation, or there's any sort of frustration at all, would love to hear it. Either send us a message or book a feedback call, and would love to discuss it to see how we can get Edexia to learn these patterns quicker. Because the biggest thing right now is the further down the spectrum you go, the harder it is. Where on the one side of the spectrum, you have simple formative assessment, where the shorter the assessment, the less nuanced the judgment, the easier it's going to be for Edexia to actually mark and provide value. Whereas the longer the assessment, the more multimodal the assessment, and the more complex the judgments, the harder it's going to be for Edexia to learn the underlying understanding. And a lot of the time, it's also going to be hard for the teacher as well, because maybe they haven't fully defined the thought process themselves. And so Edexia might actually help you do that through this process. But then that's the sort of key idea. This technology can handle handwriting, it can handle graphs and images and so on. However, the more multimodal formats, the more information, and the more it will potentially struggle. But any areas that you notice that where it's limited, would love to hear about it so we can actually improve it and act on that quicker. And then once everything is marked and approved, you can go back to the submission dashboard and you can download those grades. And this is where you can also, like I said, remove the marks if this is a draft and you just want to say progressing well rather than 5 out of 6, or needs work rather than giving a discrete mark of 3 out of 4. And then you can also remove that sidebar. So what that's referring to is that right-hand sidebar if you don't want to give any justification or feedback at all, but only the student comments. And then a couple of the small things here and there, you can actually add your own student comments. So you can select text here and actually add a comment just like you would in some other annotation workflows. And you can also select areas of the script as well to add comments here, and that will all be sent through to the student. So that's sort of core workflow. There's a lot of improvements that we'll be looking to make. I would love to hear from you and some feedback from you on how and what we should actually improve. But that's pretty much the core workflow, and we're looking forward to being in contact.